Hello, my name is Joe, and welcome to my channel, Joe's Book and Movie Corner. It has been a while since I've made my last video. I mentioned last time that this month I was going over a huge, major life change, and that change has happened. I am tired, I have less time to read, so I've read less full books. But I did get a lot of reading done. So in this video, this is going to be my monthly wrap-up, and I'm going to go over really 3 different BookTube events and clubs in this list, as well as a couple books I just read outside of these events. The first event is Horror Mayhem by the bookish Bryants, and also I have an entry for Roger's Cheapo Book Club, created by Michael K. Vaughan, which overlaps with one of my Horror Mayhem entries, as well as a book from the Lone Star Book Club created by Randy Ray at the Literate Texan. So let's go ahead and get started. I'm going to do these out of order than what I read. And I will start with the Horror Mayhem books. And the theme was to do various shorter works from different decades. And while I didn't pick like a range of decades, I knew I wanted to do a couple older entries, and that was inspired by the Roger's Cheapo Book Club entry. And then I wanted to jump ahead and do 2 newer entries from the 90s and actually the 2020s. So let's go ahead and start with my first entry. By the way, you're going to notice I'm doing less editing because I have just less time now in general in life. So I'm going to, hopefully you can see this. Let's bring this a little brighter. Hopefully you can see this okay. I don't have a nice big tablet, so I'm just going to use my phone here. But my first entry for Horror Mayhem was The Captain and the Pole Star. And I went ahead and read this whole collection. It's The Captain and the Pole Star and Other Stories by Arthur Conan Doyle. But I chose this for the title story. This was written in the 1880s. I think all of these stories are from the 1880s. And the first story, it is about a captain or a ship that is stuck in the North Pole. It's very reminiscent of a more recent novel, The Terror by Dan Simmons. Overall, I kind of liked The Terror, the novel, better, which I've read a number of years ago. But this was okay. I think in the end, I was a little disappointed in the end. It didn't quite pack the emotional punch that I was expecting. But it was okay. I will mention that there were some other stories in this collection that I did like a lot better. The first one was Habakkuk Jephson's, that's hard to say, Habakkuk Jephson's Statement. That was kind of a bizarre story where really the main plot kind of focused around a very strong racial element, which was, kind of shocking for, to be reading in 2021. But overall, it had actually some horror elements. Basically, the whole setup is it's another story that takes place on a ship, and there's some murders that start occurring. There was also another story in this collection called The Great Keinplatz Experiment. That was a lot of fun. It was kind of like a Freaky Friday situation where a college professor and his student end up swapping bodies. So that was a lot of fun. And then my favorite story in this collection was called John Huxford's Hiatus. And it was about an Englishman that loses his job, so he decides he's going to get a job in Canada. He goes over to check this new job out with the intention of bringing over his fiancée later on. When he's in Canada, he gets robbed and conked over the head and has the worst case of amnesia and just totally forgets who he is. And it's this great romantic story. And this one, for a short story, it does have, in my opinion, a very emotional and a well-done ending that just doesn't end as abruptly as, say, the title story in this collection. Okay, so my next entry is an entry from Roger's Cheapo Book Club, and it was Weird Tales, Volume Number 1, Issue 1 from March of 2023. And I've mentioned before on this channel that I generally don't like to read short stories. You can see I'm reading 2 short story collections in a row. That is starting to change for me. I'm starting to enjoy reading short stories, and I did enjoy this entire issue quite a bit. Now, the first story is, or the titled story is Ooze by Anthony M. Rudd. That's what's featured on the cover here. I didn't really like it. I was kind of tired when I read it. By the way, you're going to notice me mention that a lot. I am most of my reading is done when I am very, very tired. So sometimes that affects my opinion of what I'm reading. But Ooze I didn't really like. I don't remember much about it. But the two stories that stuck out to me in this were The Ghost Guard by Bryan Irvine. It's about a prison guard that is killed, and then his ghost remains in the prison. I thought that was a lot of fun. And then my favorite story from this magazine was The Grave by Orville R. Emerson. It is about a World War I soldier that is essentially buried alive in his bunker during a artillery bombardment. And that was really good. It's basically about him writing a journal about him starving to death. And it was creepy. It was good. Next up for Horror Mayhem. It's the only physical book I actually read this month, and it was. We're jumping ahead now to the 1990s. This was Exquisite Corpse by Poppy Z. Brite. This is a splatterpunk book, and boy, does it deliver in both the splatter aspect and the punk aspect as well of that subgenre. It's about basically the kind of young gay men in mostly New Orleans or the New Orleans area and their subculture. And there's a serial killer in New Orleans that preys on young gay men. And then there's also a serial killer from England that escapes. And these two killers are, that they're eventually going to meet. And the whole book is about many of the characters are HIV positive. And the whole book kind of delivers on the punk aspect of splatterpunk in that it's a very nihilistic story. There's really no hope. It's just full of depravity. Obviously, it's about serial killers, so there's plenty of violence and gore. There's extremely graphic sex scenes. And after a while, it is a page turner, but after a while, I think when it started to introduce the cannibalism and even mentioned incest, that was when I was like, all right, this is a good book, but man, I'm ready for it to be over. So it was an assault. In the end, it just, I'm not going to spoil it, but it remains very hopeless and just nihilistic. And it, again, really, I think it is about the hopelessness of this kind of subculture in the 80s and 90s as they're dealing with just the AIDS epidemic and how just society, you get the sense that this group of young men, society just hates them, and they're acting with sinful behavior, and it's not there's not a religious element that's explicitly stated, but it feels like, well, this is just God's wrath on you, this horrible disease, and life is hopeless, and doesn't it all suck? So we might as well just go out indulging in the most heinous debauchery. It's a really good book, but it is not for the faint of heart, but it is well written. And then the last, I actually don't have. Do I have this pulled up? I don't have this pulled up, so I will probably put this image on the screen. But I read, as my final entry, a short story from a short story collection called Served Cold, a HorrorTube anthology, edited by R. St. Clair and Steve Donoghue. Steve Donoghue, of course, I'm a fan of his channel. And so the story I read was actually The Cold Traps by Steve Donoghue. I will admit, though, I don't think the story quite worked for me. It's essentially, and again, if I'm missing something, I apologize. I was tired when I read it. But it's basically about a group of workers on the moon. So it's a sci-fi horror story. It's about a group of workers on the moon that uncover something, and it creates this like space zombie virus that is kind of spreading. And there is a very interesting aspect to this story where, as the reader, we are essentially you get the impression that you're kind of watching these events unfold through like security cam footage. And the narrator will make commentaries, or will make several commentaries on kind of the events that are happening. And this is an aspect that I liked a lot, but it left me wanting more. I wanted a little bit more explanation about who are we watching this with? Why exactly are we getting some commentary instead of just the narrative being told in a more traditional way? So I wanted more of that. And the reason I think the story didn't 100% work for me was sometimes you read a book or you watch a movie where there's an element that you want more of it, but you're still satiated by the story itself. An example of this is I think the book Red Dragon by Thomas Harris, as well as the movie adaptation Manhunter, directed by Michael Mann. In both of the book and the movie, Hannibal Lecter is a character, and by the end of the book and the end of the movie, you want more of Hannibal Lecter. You're like, man, that was great. I want more of that character. And you don't quite get it, but you're still satisfied with the story. And again, I don't know exactly... I don't know if I can explain exactly why, or if I don't know if I can explain other reasons why this story didn't 100% work. It almost did for me. But I think that's part of it. I like this idea that we are watching these events happening as kind of a document of this disaster that's starting and is spreading. And I just wanted more of that element, like we're watching these events happen after the fact. But I didn't feel like I quite got it. But anyway, but that was it for both Horror Mayhem as well as Roger's Cheap Old Book Club. And I'm just going to go through kind of the rest of these. I'm going to get to the Lone Star Book Club story in a second here. But the next book that I read was the next entry in the Dungeon Crawler Carl series. It's The Butcher's Masquerade by Matt Dinnamin. I think this is this number? Yeah, book 5. And at this point, I'm still enjoying the series as a whole, but I've mentioned before some issues that I've had with the series, and I'm really starting to feel those issues the further I get along. One issue that I keep bringing up is these novels, they happen one right after the other, so they don't feel like separate novels. They feel like just very long chapters. And another thing that is bothering me about this is there is no, since these are essentially big long chapters, there's no kind of reintroduction to the story in like a prologue or there's no recap of events. You're just expected to just remember all these little side characters that we're introduced to. And you're supposed to remember, so there's elements in this dungeon that they're in. And if you've never heard of this series, it's basically a kind of a live-action video game that the main characters have to kind of fight their way through. And each level of the dungeon is kind of, there's a new theme. And sometimes I don't quite care about the current level's theme because I know, well, it doesn't matter to the overall story. Sometimes there's stories that span levels, and it gets confusing how, it gets confusing to me when you're supposed to keep track of a story that's within the game that is spanning multiple levels and how it interacts with that particular level's story and also how it interacts with the outside world. If that didn't make any sense, you see the problem. At least that's my problem. This is kind of my problem with it. So it's kind of hard to keep track of what digital characters are important and how they interact with the real world. And another problem is, and we get another, kind of what I was talking about with the last story. The best element of this is the outside world, and you always kind of want more of the outside world. Occasionally, Carl and Donut, his talking cat, occasionally they're pulled out of the game. And they have to go on these talk shows because this whole thing is televised. And that's the best part. And you just want more of it. So I'm still enjoying the series. I'm still going to continue to read books 6 and 7. But my problems with it they're not new problems, but I'm noticing them more as I go on in the series. And it's not a series where I think you can take a break. You're just going to kind of not remember things if you take a month off, as I did. But next up, I read James Lee Burke's Clete. This was a book that was selected for the Lone Star Book Club, created by Randy Ray at the Literate Texan. I have never read a James Lee Burke novel, and this is his latest book in the Dave Robichaux series. So I've never read a Dave Robichaux book. This is my introduction to the character, and it was interesting because I'm getting the impression that Dave Robichaux is the main character in the series. But this book, the main character is, I guess, his sidekick, Clete. So Clete is the narrator, and you follow kind of his point of view. Overall, I liked it. It's it kind of follows the tradition of American mysteries, where it's one kind of small event, just kind of as the chapters go on, this seemingly small crime in the beginning kind of expands into this big, large, huge conspiracy. Overall, I liked it. The character of Clete, there's an element to his character that sometimes I find annoying in characters, kind of like morally righteous characters. He carries around a picture of a mother and daughter from the Holocaust, and he keeps referencing it. And it didn't bother me that much, but sometimes when a character does this and they keep referring to this historical event that they just, not that we should let go of the Holocaust, but they're kind of obsessed with it, and they're very morally righteous. Sometimes I find that annoying. I couldn't help whenever he brought up that picture, and this is going to sound horrible. I couldn't help but think of the Tony Soprano quote from The Sopranos, where the character of Furio he says he's crying for, he's sad about his father. And Tony asks him, "Why are you crying?" "Well, I'm sad about my father," is the reason he gives him. And Tony goes, "Okay, but you got to get over it." It's a horrible thing to say to someone that's grieving, but I couldn't help but think of that line, like, all right, get over it. You weren't around in the Holocaust, like, get over it. Again, not that we should get over the Holocaust. I'm not saying that. But again, it didn't really bother me, but it almost did. That being said, I would love to go to read an earlier Dave Robichaux novel. I'm definitely intrigued, and I will definitely read more of this author. Next up, we have, I think, this is the last book I'm going to talk about. And before diving into Star Trek, if you remember from my last month's video, I read a lot of Star Trek in anticipation of Book Trek, which starts in June. So this month, I wanted to save myself. I didn't want to read any Star Trek, but I wanted to read some kind of movie tie-in, science fiction. So I read Star Wars, Heir to the Empire. This is book 1 in the original Thrawn trilogy. If you're not sure of what this is the book that essentially started off in the 90s, the Star Wars Expanded Universe series of books. That Expanded Universe has since been wiped clean when Star Wars was purchased by Disney. They kind of just wiped the novelverse clean, and now this is kind of referred to as the Star Wars Legends Expanded Universe. This is, if you ask which Star Wars book should I read, this often comes up as highly recommended. I was disappointed. Unfortunately, I did not think this was as interesting as the original trilogy. I think I'll have a little bit more to say about it next month when I go over the second novel, which I've also already read. But in short, it kind of has the same problem I talked about with Dungeon Crawler Carl. These books are not novels. They are long chapters. If you've watched Steve Donoghue mentions the same thing. I'm mentioning Steve Donoghue a lot here. But he mentions the same thing I've noticed when he talks about kind of modern fantasy series, is you don't get novels, you just get really long chapters. So this series, instead of reading just a 400-page novel, I feel like I'm reading just the first third of a 1,000-page novel. And while it's okay, it's not good enough to be 1,000 pages. I think I'll talk more about this maybe next month when I talk about the second book, and potentially I'll read the third book and finish up the trilogy. But that's all I'll say about it for now. Moving forward, this month I'm currently reading a Star Trek novel, so I'm definitely going to be participating in June on the Range. This is the James Blish Spock Must Die. I don't think it's very good, but I'm enjoying it a lot. I've only read like 30 pages of it. I had kind of a false start with June on the Range. I tried reading The Virginian, and I put it down to jump over to Book Trek. I think I'll try to jump back into The Virginian, but if I'm not feeling it, I might just maybe pick something else for June on the Range. Also moving forward, again, it's tougher to make these videos. Again, my life is very, very busy. It's kind of turned upside down. But I'm going to try to keep making at least the monthly recap videos. I may start making weekly recap videos. I don't know. We'll see. But that is all for now. Thank you.